in that case, we'll welcome our first speaker. So our first speaker tonight is going to be Rachelle Winefield. So Rachelle is a manager of topographic data at Land Information New Zealand. She's got a background as a surveyor, trained down at Otago University, and she's one of the leading vertical datum experts in New Zealand. She was recently awarded the Survey Spatial New Zealand Supreme Award for her contribution to surveying in New Zealand. So she's definitely well placed to teach us a little bit about the New Zealand vertical datum. So without any further ado, please welcome Rachelle.
Hey, Howard. I'm glad to be here tonight, and it's good to be talking to people who are not my cat. I am going to try and share my screen, which is always a challenge with these types of event, and hopefully you are seeing that now. Awesome. So Emery was the person. I'm going to point to him definitely and say thanks for inviting me along to MapTime. I've heard quite a lot about the MapTime event from the previous one hosted in Wellington, and I was pretty keen to come and talk about my favourite topic, which is heights. And most people know that a lot of people here from LINZ will know that I'm only about 1.6 metres tall, so I'm definitely overcompensating in the height field. So when we are talking about heights in New Zealand, we're sort of like talking about elevation references, and generally what we'll talk about is things in terms of mean sea level. And I'll get to talking about that a bit later on in this presentation about why I am not a fan of mean sea level based reference systems, and why we're moving to this thing called New Zealand Vertical Datum 2016, and why we're going to be expanding this to joining land and sea, or JLAS, to be able to cover the wet areas as well as the dry ones. So when we're talking about heights, it can get quite confusing, but if we talk about other systems transformations that we do transformations all the time. Horizontal will be moving between datums and projections, or projections and projections, or datums and datums. And I'm not sure if you can see that, or if there's a video thing over the top of it, but it's the EPSG numbers that you sort of see at the bottom of your QGIS screen or something, that will indicate what datum you are currently, or projection you're currently viewing your data in terms of. And we're really quite lucky, because normally when we're moving between a datum and projection, there's some really simple maths that sort of goes behind it, the matrices and things, but your computer just sort of pushes it through and you don't actually see what's happening, and you can project your data wherever you would like it to be in the world. When it comes to height transformations, or transformations between elevation surfaces, it isn't actually that much more difficult. Some of the most common reference surfaces we use are mean sea level. And then there's NZVD2016, which I keep going on about as being an awesome thing. But you might also hear about local datums, like the Wellington 1952 or 56, can't remember, datum. Or if you are a water person, you might do things in terms of chart datum or lowest astronomic tide. And what we can do is we can find a benchmark on the land, and we can easily use addition and subtraction to move between those surfaces really quite easily, and it's all quite simple. However, we're talking about the real world, and sea level is not a constant. And one of my favourite things to do when I'm locked down in Wellington is to look at flat Earth documentaries and other propaganda. And I had to correct this. You normally call it sea level, but in reality, it is sea curve. Our sea surface is not flat, and no matter where you are in the coast, it actually actually changes. And it's even worse than that, because sea level, as well as being a curved surface, is affected by a whole heap of things like salinity, tidal currents, sea level rise, storm surges, and like in this benchmark here that we've got, reference mark, it's in Wellington Harbour, so it's an area that's nicely protected from whatever's happening in the ocean. So if we're using this 1 point subtraction addition thing to approximate what's happening in Wellington Harbour, one of the questions is, well, how close will that be to approximating things in the whole Wellington region or the whole of New Zealand nationally? And the answer is within a couple of metres, normally, most of the time. So what we've done in the past, we've used a local vertical datum, and it's normally in terms of what people have said as mean sea level. So we're talking, like I said, Wellington datum 1953. There was actually a data set that was taken between 1945 and 1962, which is generally trending uphill towards 2020. So we're taking a mean of that data to find a mean sea level, which is in Wellington Harbour, which is not representative of the whole of the Wellington city. And then when you see that this is then projected over something which looks like a little mauve box, which kind of goes up past Palmerston North. So if we're actually using that local mean sea level in Wellington to try to work out what is happening past Palmerston North, we'll probably find that it's actually not very representative. So if you're on the coast trying to do flooding in Foxton, having a height in terms of Wellington Harbour is probably not going to help you very much. But one of the things that LINZ has done recently is come up with transformation grids which cover that whole area. So got to look at Christchurch because it's quite interesting to see what's happening between the different coasts there. So we looked at the LINZ geodetic database, and we looked at all the marks which have heights on them, and we had marks which had a New Zealand vertical datum height and a Lyttelton vertical datum height on them. And you did a comparison between them and gridded them up, and you could sort of see that across the Lyttelton area there's little targets all over the place, and there's also different slopes everywhere. You can sort of see where the roads go over the passes and things. So this is what's happening on land with these height systems. So you're taking an NZVD2016 height, which I'll talk about in the next couple of slides, and then you're warping it to fix to the mean sea level measurements, which were in Lyttelton datum and taken all over that area. So you're adding errors to the elevations that you have. So the opposite approach you can take is to use New Zealand vertical datum 2016. So instead of using a reference surface which is based on a mean sea level reading, we decided to use gravity. So we came up with a gravity constant across the whole of the country, and came up with a surface which can be well represented and modelled across the whole country. So you can actually use GPS measurements, NZGD2000, NZTM2000, to be able to identify heights or elevations across the country. And then if you wanted to, you can add one of these grids back over the top to be able to get them in terms of those tide gauges in the harbour, and with all the distortion that you see there. So what this does is basically provides that consistent surface across New Zealand, so that when you're adding elevations together, you're not getting that distortion through the grids. And I think that's something that I've talked to Emery about recently, that you're trying to add data sets which are based on funky mean sea level readings, and they just don't fit. And that's what it, we've got all these tools on the LINZ. There's a bit of propaganda here actually, but if you go to the LINZ data service, you can find some of those grids. You can find the New Zealand vertical datum grids, and then you can add them into your software like QGIS, or you can use things like PDAL to transfer our LiDAR data sets between datums. Or if you're just after simple one-point conversions, the LINZ website just has you enter in your coordinates before and after, and it can tell you what the heights are in terms of those different reference surfaces. But that was all the dry land stuff, and the thing we're moving to next is the wet sea things. So we were thinking about doing a similar approach where you can get all these different sea level surfaces, and you can constrain them with our 208 control marks and try to create those same sort of distorted grids so that you can take New Zealand vertical datum, you can put a distorted grid over it, and then you'll be able to get an actual mean sea level reading anywhere along the coast, which is quite a lot more helpful than a localized in a harbour reading. But 208 points around the coast is really not a good enough number to do that. We really want a lot denser to be able to come up with a grid which is actually worthwhile. And what we have here is the NIWA tidal model, and it's obviously a huge model, but when you start getting to the coast, you're getting marks which are only 200 meters apart. So what we want to be able to get to do is get this model, be able to create surfaces just like those transformation grids, and be able to use them in like the LINZ data service, and be able to download them and put them into PDAL or your GIS software to be able to transform data sets. Now, the big problem with the grids provided by NIWA and this tidal model is that they have a mean sea level of 0 rather than what actually mean sea level is. And this is what my job at LINZ is at the moment, when I'm not the manager of the topographic data group, is to try to find out a way to be able to move that mean so that it's actually where it should be. And what that will do is correct all that access so that we can actually model the data properly. And the outcome of this is going to be that we can be able to get our wet, like our bathy multi-beam data, and we'll be able to get our terrestrial LiDAR data, and we'll be able to combine it in the seamless data set so that people doing modelling like we have at Whakaari White Island to be able to see exactly what's happening in that area. And I think that's pretty much the snapshot. So this new edition of the JLAS tool is coming, and it's probably going to be around for beta testing mid next year. So we're hoping for a beta release in 2022 and going out for the wider public the year after that, once we've managed to convince NIWA that they have got a tidal model that will be fit for purpose. And I'm quite happy to chat about this further.
The next speaker we'll pull up will be Chris. If you're ready to go, I can see you're with us. So Chris McDowall is joining us from Auckland. It's going to be the nice special treat for us folks down in Wellington and Christchurch to have somebody virtually join us as well.
Sure. Sorry, it's been a bit of a crazy day. Trying to find where my presentation is.
It's all good.
Here we
go. While you're getting set up, I could do a quick introduction if you like.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So some of you may already know Chris. Some of you may have seen his name across a quite cool atlas that got published about 2 years ago. Alongside Tim Janine, I believe, was the graphic artist for that one. That was the We Are Here atlas. So Chris has been floating around creating all sorts of wonderful data visualization for the last couple of years. Currently, I believe he's working at New Zealand Herald.
Yeah,
Well,
true. In fact, I was working there about a minute ago because a whole lot of new locations of interest just came in. So I'm sorry I missed the last speaker's talking because I was quickly doing some work. Can you see my, is the share working?
no, not at this point.
Okay, sorry, I never used Teams. Oh wait, here we go, share. Ah, okay, great. I can see, I think. I'll just share my entire screen.
There's still nothing on here.
Oh, I just hit the button. How's that?
Yeah, that's good. Really
Cool,
good.
cool. Sweet.
Cool. Without any further ado, take it away, mate.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so I should set a timer, 10 minutes. Here we go. Yeah, when I was approached to do this by Mairead, I said I was going to do 5 random map tips, but then I realized as I wrote this or put this together over the weekend that these aren't really random. I sort of jotted them down and they were just all things that were top of mind. But I guess there are sort of 2 things that run through this, a pair of common threads. And those common threads are testing maps on an audience and also labels and annotations. And so this is this is what I meant to be like a grab bag of tips, but it's really focused on that. So I want you just to take a look at this very first slide. Here we go. So I'm just going to leave it there for 5 seconds. And then that's it. What do you remember about that slide? When I show that to people, when I've done this exercise a lot of times with a lot of different maps, on that particular one, they'll say, I remember lots of little maps of New Zealand. I remember something maybe about birds. I think there were maps of different birds and there were some different colors. And that's what people seem to remember. And then they sort of run out of steam. But the map has passed the test at that point. There's a thing that I do more and more, especially maps for communication with the general public, where I do this thing called the 5-second test that my friend, a colleague at the National Library when I worked there, Michael Ascarides introduced me to. And basically you just take whatever it is that you've made, be it a website or be it a map or a data visualization, and you put it in front of a person for 5 seconds. You say you're gonna show them something, but you don't tell them they're only going to see it for 5 seconds. And then you pull it away or you close the tab or whatever, and you ask them what they saw. And you keep refining the map until you make sure that there's something that happens in that 5 seconds. It doesn't have to be that they get the whole point of it. They're never going to get that. But it's really transformed my process. Just giving enough cues that a very surface read is enough to yield something that is really like, you know, that within initial contact, someone has understood the broad sort of approach of what you're about. The next tip that I had is just to really lean into labels. I think with the rise of digital cartography over the last 25 years, labels have been kind of backgrounded, and I find that really a real missed opportunity. I look back on like older maps. So this is I think, kind of amazing map from the early 20th century. It's in the National Library of Australia. It's the new, it's these new Oxford wall maps. And this is a particular map of Australia, just sort of denoting where there are and aren't like levels of sheep as livestock. And it's just such a powerful map. And there's something about GIS, modern GIS systems, and this has been true, I think, since the early to mid 90s, which has kind of like meant that people, for whatever reason, labels are kind of hard, and they're really hard when they're automated. They're actually one of the few things that's kind of easier to do manually, I think. But maps lose a lot of their personality when you leave the labels out, and a lot of their explanatory power, in my opinion. This is another one. Again, it relates to labels, but it's slightly different. It's annotations, and I sort of include in this captions and captioning in general. God, I hope you all can hear me. I'm just going to make sure that. Okay, great. There's some chat going on. That's good. Annotations transform maps. So this is a photograph I just took over the weekend from Marc Monmonier's, in my opinion, classic from the 90s, Mapping It Out, expository cartography for the humanities and social scientists. And it's the same map, like 4 times the same map, the same symbology, but with just like totally different captions and labels emphasizing different things. And these 4 different sort of like textual frames for the map like utterly transform, I believe, what this map is. I won't go through every single one, but like, for example, in the top one, the top left one, it emphasizes that in dry weather, the bicycle shortcut saves 3 kilometers, but it's only 2 kilometers of rowing. And so it's all kind of like about the speed at which you can sort of get there. Whereas the bottom left is emphasizing what's dangerous about it, and that that there's these tidal bores and treacherous shoals. And you've only got so much space, and be it a digital or a print map, to use annotations like this. And I find them really precious, and such a kind of like amazing sort of but scarce resource. And they can really assist the reader, particularly a reader who's might be not so confident with cartographic interpretation. More labels. Unify features with label and color. This is something that I've kind of encountered lots of places, but there's a really clear example here from Daniel Huffman, which is, it's like a really simple little thing, but the purple bits he labels with purple fonts, with purple text, and the green bits are labeled with green, and the sort of like taupey blue, like teal grey, are labeled with a teal grey. And it really just emphasizes that this name of this place is this thing, like the relationship between the label and the thing that is being referred to. So yeah, so you can unify that by using the same hues of color. Again, it's something that's a little tricky to do sometimes with automated GIS software, but you can bend it a little bit to your will, or if you take it into something like Adobe Illustrator, it becomes a very straightforward process. The final of my 5 tips in 10 minutes is when you, this is again about testing a map with a reader, is when you sit down with a person and you show them something, and I really encourage you when we're not in like lockdown to do it with real people, is to watch where they look and where they point on a map. And in various projects that I've worked on, I do, especially the Atlas of Aotearoa, I did this constantly. Like I just in the last days of the project, last week days being like the last sort of year, I would bring people in and just sit them down and put them in front of a map and watch both their fingers and their eyes. And you learn so much about both what the focus is for the person, and also the bits that are neglected, and also watching their eyes, how often they have to flick backwards and forwards to a legend in order to decode a map. And if they're having to do that a lot, it probably means that either your legend isn't good enough, or you should be labeling more directly on the map. But yeah, just watch the person's physicality, and you'll learn a lot about about how successful this this cartographic artifact is. And that's me. I'm going to stop sharing.
Our last speaker of the night is the esteemed Maurice. Here we are. Hi, Maurice. So Maurice will.
Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Good.
Maurice will joins us from Environment Canterbury, where he's been working towards a digital twin base map of the Canterbury region. So I'm pretty excited to see what this is all about, because I've heard a little bit about digital twins, and it seems to be a promising future area of GIS. So without any further ado, take it away, Maurice.
Hi everyone. So just a bit about myself. I look after Canterbury Maps at Environment Canterbury, and it's a partnership between Environment Canterbury and the territorial authorities of Canterbury, starting from Kaikoura in the north all the way to Waitaki in the south. And tonight I'll be talking to you mainly about imagery and aerial capture, and how we've got these other programs. Perhaps I'll mention LINZ as well, that we're collecting height information across Canterbury as well, so we get some nice elevation 1 meter DM across Canterbury. Just wanted to give this a dual aspect, because here on the left hand side we've got the nice shot of the Pukaki lake, and this was being captured in last summer. That's directly from the plane. And on the right hand side, we've actually gone ahead and purchased a 3D mesh of the Christchurch CBD, and the Orbica guys might see some familiar building there at the middle there. So I got to apologise to the last speaker. There's not much labelling going on these maps, because it's all to do with imagery. But I just wanted to play a few slides here on what the power of imagery is. And there's this great resource, obviously from Google, where we can see land use change. This is across Canterbury, so you can see some farming activity going on there between the Great Lakes in the Mackenzie Basin, and then this on the right hand side is around the Waiau River, so land use change around the braid rivers. Just go to the next slide, didn't quite work. On the left hand side here we've got forestry blocks of the Nelson Tasman region, and on the right hand side here, if you just look at the nature of the dry land type of farming back in the 80s, and how it's kind of converted a lot to irrigation type farming today. Oh, where's that? The same here with South Canterbury and Mid Canterbury. I live in Rolleston here, just in here, which is a fast growing town. You can see the forestry blocks disappearing and a lot here's the Tasman Glacier retreating on the left hand side. And on the right hand side we can see Lake Dunstan after the Clyde Dam was erected. So this is a typical camera that not many people own or not many companies own in New Zealand. A lot of them lease it from overseas, so they bring it in. That's one of our providers. And here's a plane. It's basically a hole in the bottom of the plane, and they fly in a kind of linear. You'll see them on the flight lines if you go to the flight tracker. They're just doing lines across the city or across the region. and the outputs on the other end. I'll just pause it there. So Canterbury, we have this massive program of work each summer. We go out and capture imagery, cost shared by the territorial authorities, Environment Canterbury, and LINZ does contribute a little bit, but unfortunately not a big amount. And if you think of the value it is for all of New Zealand, we would like to see, the national agencies kind of step up and maybe do a bit more coordination and help with the funding of it. So this is all of the capture of last summer. So we're if you go on the Canterbury maps, you can see Timaru, Ashburton is already there, Waimakariri, Selwyn, and then Christchurch Urbans and the Banks Peninsula Urbans will be there soon as well. So I'll speak about the 3D mesh. So think of digital twin of the world. Us as cartographers, we're used to this. Also look at the world straight down view, and not many people that we try and communicate our maps with are used to that, especially scale as well. So it's important that we capture data so we can effectively communicate what the real world looks like and overlay our GIS data sets on a more realistic view that people are used to. So you go on, if you go on the Canterbury Maps now, we've built this beta viewer and we have this 3D mesh of Christchurch. We were quite lucky. We purchased it under open data, so we're the first city region that's grabbed this kind of city 3D mesh as open data. The provider was quite generous and liked what we were doing with Canterbury Maps, so they were keen to make it nice and open. So it's on AGOL as well, so if you want to pull it in into your web scenes, go ahead. So here's more examples. A lot of use cases for imagery is obviously as a state, state capture of what happened during and after emergency response events. And just to plug LINZ have actually put out a guideline spec for capturing imagery for emergency management use. So go search that out if you need that for your councils. So here's the Christchurch earthquake, just the power of it, buildings being completely wiped out. Here's down the main street, Colombo Street. And if you concentrate on that quite long and thin building in the middle, you'll see just the power of earthquake, what it can do. So each event is different. So the Kaikoura event, Kaikoura earthquake was a lot of landslides. So there you can see a whole hillside falling away. And actually these landslides created a lot of dams. So they cut off a lot of rivers. So Environment Canterbury had to be monitoring these newly created lakes, landslide dam lakes, just in case they would actually break out and, a rush of water would go down the catchment and affect communities down catchment. And if you were in Kaikoura, obviously it became an island because the State Highway 1 north and south were cut off, and the Navy had to go in and restore a few services and get some people out. Flooding is a major issue, obviously, in Canterbury, and these rain events, that's becoming more often with climate change. Here's the 2019 Rangitata floods in South Canterbury. And it took a lot of power lines down and cut off a lot of State Highway 1 routes. But actually, with imagery, we know where the river used to flow back. We've got some good imagery in the 1940s, historic imagery. If you go onto Canterbury Maps, again, another plug. Actually, the river would flow down this channel anyway. So you got to look at the lifelines and the utility providers, how are they using this data? Are they aware of it? Do they know what kind of reinforcing they need on their infrastructure, just so they don't get wiped out in a big rain event and a big flood like this? Here's an example of the Ashburton rivers, just of, land use change constraining these rivers has actually made them more, these braided rivers made them more dangerous. It's meant a lot more volume of water going through in a smaller space. So come a kind of 1 in 200 year event, this is the imagery of the May floods. You'll just get one major breakout. A braided river will do what it does, which is try and go across, different channels as it needs to get to the sea. I've been trying to get the infrared up to date as well. We've got the infrared imagery Basemap collection, and obviously, that's good to show water. You can see there on this scene, there's a lot of irrigation ponds there. That's probably weren't there before over time, and just the vegetation, high vegetation, forestry around the river margins. They obviously reflect quite darker. Yeah, and then it's okay, we're grabbing all this imagery as councils, as New Zealand, what are we doing with it? So I'm here to talk to you guys to say, well, your work in anything that looks at GeoAI to try and pull out features from the imagery. As a regional council, we're interested in irrigation areas, pest plants, gorse and broom, because we have lots of teams doing monitoring, going out on site, doing manual checks. So if we can get massive data extractions across the region, across the nation, that'd be great. We do, wetlands monitoring. We try and protecting wetlands, so changes in wetlands. Again, I've mentioned soil defence response and recovery, coastlines, coastal erosion. So as part of the PGF LIDAR program, I don't know if everyone's heard of that, with LINZ, we're going to actually capture the coastlines. We've captured imagery across the coastline, and we're capturing the LIDAR across the coast twice. We've done it last summer, and we'll do it again in 3 years' time, just to measure any sea level change and and coastal erosion along the Canterbury coast. And at a TA level, things like infrastructure, roads, tent lines, manholes, impervious surfaces, building outlines. If we can get some processes going on in GeoAI for those kind of features, that would be great. How I'm doing for time? I think that should have, I never time myself, so that I'm hoping that's long enough or short enough. Is there any questions?